So I'm going to attempt to retopologize this shoe here into something a little bit more, a little bit less high poly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring it into ZBrush and then use ZBrush as retopologizer. So before I bring it into ZBrush, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that the holes, there aren't any, basically trying to fill up any holes that exist on this model. So for example, something like this, I would just close this up by just capping those holes. Oops, over here. So what am I, the command that I'm using to close that hole is collapse right here. Collapse, yeah. So that's just gonna close that hole up, and then I'm gonna just do it over here as well. Select that and then collapse. Oops, make sure I'm selecting borders. Collapse. Now, because this shoe is going to be, I'm not going to be looking at the inside of the shoe. I'm just going to do a quick method of just basically filling up this this big area, this hole here. And a quick and dirty way of doing that is just to do this. Just basically just select some a ring of edges here, like. Okay, so I'm just delete this so the ring doesn't go all the way over. Oops, sorry. Oops, deleted the wrong one. That one. All right, there. So, so basically, I just selected that ring, and then I'm just gonna shift and then scale in, and then basically, I'm just gonna create kind of like this, kind of like a coverage here. So it's just filling it up. It looks weird at this stage, but when I bring it into ZBrush, I'm going to use a method that will fix all of this. Just trust me on this. It's going to work out fine. Okay, and again, because I don't want to go all the way around, I'm just going to delete those and then go like that, and then excuse me, shift drag in down to there. Oops. Actually, you can also use extrude polygons and then just drag these down. Okay. Now there's a little gap over here. Now it might be okay to just leave it, because in ZBrush we're going to use a method that will actually fill in these little gaps. But if you want to just cover it up, that also works as well. So just go like that. And then, yeah, okay, anyways, yeah, let's just bring this into ZBrush, and then from there it should fill in these little empty holes here. Export to an FBX. Settings look fine, like that. Now over the ZBrush, I'm going to import it, and it should pop up here. Well, now the reason it popped up is because I already had a tool, but if you're starting from a new document, I'll show you what it'll look like. So basically, I just opened a new document or started a new document, import the tool, and then now I'm gonna drag it into the scene, and then go to perspective mode. And now you'll see that it's a bit, so as you can see, it's really quite messy there. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna use something called Dynamesh, and we're gonna tweak the settings a bit. So I like to just start with like these settings and then lower the sub-projection over here, and then turn out the blur to like 30, I guess, and try Dynamesh. Now it it should do something like that. Basically, it just kind of created like a approximate mesh around it, and it should have filled in some of these holes here. Now, if it didn't fill up the holes, you may need to reduce the resolution a little bit, but you don't want to reduce it too much because you don't want to like lose the overall shape of the shoe. Like you don't want to be like that. You still want to have a bit of the shoe because when you do the ZRemesher, you want to be able to have some of this. Because when I want to ZRemesh it, I'm gonna use some of these angled shapers to kind of follow the contours. So it really kind of depends on what your final polygon count is. But for me, I'm just gonna set it to like something like this. It's a little bit blocky, but when I do the ZRemesher, it should be fine because the end result should fall into my polygon budget. So let's just stay with this for now. And after that's done, you notice there's a few holes in here, like some kind of holes. You might help to close the holes. Go to modify topology and close holes. And if that still doesn't work, now this piece over here at the end, that's actually going to give us a bit of a problem because it's such a thin piece. And in fact, it probably would have been better to just remove that and just not bring that into the Zbrush, because this doesn't get retopologized very well. It's actually much easier just to kind of retopologize that manually by just kind of like separating it and then just kind of just going like reducing some of the edges like that, and then we're just kind of like doing it manually this way. It's much quicker and you get a much cleaner mesh. Because the Zbrush remesher, and in fact most remeshers in general, they don't really deal with thin pieces like this very well. So let's just bring this out into Zbrush again without that backstrap. Okay, now let's just bring this in again. Now let's do this Dynamesh thing again. So again, I think 100 looked good, and then 30, and you got to bring the subproduction down because see, the reason if you don't bring the subproduction, what it does is it doesn't really fill in the holes that well, and you're kind of left with these weird gaps. So if you bring it down, it's gonna be a bit blocky, but what it's gonna do is gonna fill in these holes a bit better, and you can actually just smooth these out. I'm holding down the Shift key, and then I'm just kind of doing a smooth operator on these things. Now because I'm gonna ZRemesh this a little bit, I don't really need to keep these details because it's gonna be pretty low polygon, and I'm not gonna really worry about these really small little details here when I do the ZRemesher. So I'm just shift smoothing these things. And for little holes in there like that, you might want to use the clay tool. That I find that helps quite a bit, like that, and then just kind of shift smooth it again. You don't want to use overkill the clay because you don't want to overdo the clay because you don't want to like screw up the overall shape of the shoe too much. You don't want to like go like that, you know, and then it's going to create a huge lump there. But for in general, the clay is really useful for like filling little gaps that the Dynamesh might have missed, like little holes like that. Okay, so once that's done, actually let me just smooth this out a little bit because I don't really care about these details in my low poly mesh. Even these ones as well, I don't really. I don't want to take this into the ZRemesher. It's not gonna really. I don't want this to show up in my low poly mesh. Yeah. Okay, now I'm gonna use the ZRemesher. So go to ZRemesher and then click on Detect Edges, and just leave it at 5 for now. And you can leave these settings to default as well. And let's just click on ZRemesher, see what the results are. All right, that's not bad. So it reduced it down to 5,900 polygons. But for my budget, I'm gonna go down. I want it down to around 3,000. So I'm just gonna chip that to 2.5, and then click on it again, ZRemesher. Oh, okay. Actually, before I do that, I make sure I need to start from that point. Click on ZRemesher. Okay, there. So now that's around 3,500. That's not bad. It's not bad. And so let's just undo that a bit. Now, if you want, you can actually use these things called ZRemesher guides. That if you want to keep certain shapes of the shoe, like for example, like if you want to keep this, if you feel that this shape is important in your to keep, you just want to like you can just draw a ZRemesh guide to kind of help the algorithm, the ZRemesher, and then it'll kind of try to keep this polygon flow in the result. And yeah, so let's try this. Now this curve strength here, that actually determines how strong it'll follow this curve here. So if you set it up to 90, the end result will follow this line quite accurately. Now let's see what happens when I set it something really low. It's gonna almost practically not really see. It doesn't really take into account the guidelines that I gave it. Right? So setting it higher as much gives me a result that's more accurate to what it's actually pretty. But in general, that's what it's supposed to do. I believe this curve strength, the higher you set it, the closer it will be to your ZRemesher guide. Right. So okay. So I mean that looks pretty close to my budget, 3,000. And actually, I don't really want too much density in there. So if I want to reduce the polygon count in that area, what I would do is I would first go back to my original, and then I would reduce the adaptive size. The adaptive size is what creates those extra loops in smaller detailed areas. See, so that's much more low poly and kind of closer to what I kind of wanted. Something. Yeah, that's pretty good. But let's bring it back up to 37, and then one more time, and then boom. Yeah, there we go, and that is actually a really good result for my game. Pretty low poly, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this back into 3D Studios Max, and then basically UV map it, and then basically then I'll just take the high poly and bake that into the low poly. So so I'm gonna delete this and then bring in the ZBrush result, and bam, there we go. So we've got a nice low poly mesh that kind of came in from the high poly, and it's pretty follows the shape pretty well. And so I mean the rest of the stuff where you take the high poly and bake it down to this mesh, that I'm not going to cover that because that's been covered like several hundred times on YouTube. So yeah, good luck with the rest of the steps.